Hello everyone. So in this part, which is the last part of AJAX, we are going to go through step by step of how to use AJAX on an API, which will provide us with JSON data, and we will see how we can retrieve the data asynchronously from this API and consume it. Consume means how to use the data that is provided and show the data on the page. And then in the last part of the lecture, I'm going to talk about how you can use this for the practice exercise. So I'll explain the practice exercise and then I'll download and show you what the practice exercise looks like right now and what you have to do to complete it. Okay, so let's go step by step. So the first part is this AJAX step by step. It has 5 steps, and these steps are fairly simple. The first one, whenever you want to use AJAX in your JavaScript code, the first thing that we need to do is we need to create an object. This object is an instance of the XML HTTP request class. As you can see over here, this is fairly simple. We create an object, XHR. We call it XHR because this is the short form that is most popularly used. You can call it anything that you like. And we use the new keyword to create a new object. And then the name of the class is XML HTTP request, which is the longer form of the XHR object. Okay. Once we do this, the first thing that we need to do, if you remember in the previous sessions, I explained to you that whenever you want to use an XHR, you need to first define a callback function. This callback function is initiated whenever something returns back to you. Okay, so what happens basically is something like this. Let's take a visual view of what is happening. So let's say, for example, I have my browser here, which is my client or the browser. And what we are doing over here is this is the provider. This is the server or the API provider. You can call it whatever you like. So I'm going to call it server, or you can also call it an API service provider, okay, which is responsible for sending a JSON data file. Okay, so what we are doing, in the first step, what we are doing is we are creating something over here in the middle, and this something that we are creating is actually an XHR object or JSON. Okay, so what is happening is whenever you make a request, this XHR object will be responsible for communicating it to the server, getting the values from it, and then showing it on your screen. So the first thing we do is we create this XHR object, which is the instance of the XML HTTP request class. And the next thing that we do over here is we are trying to create something called as a callback function. This over here, I will refer to this as a callback function. Okay, this function will be executed once the server is ready with the data that we requested. Okay, so what happens is something like this. The browser makes a request through the XML XHR object. The XHR object communicates or connects to the server, passes on the request to them. The server processes the request. This could be anything. This could be, for example, some might consider this as a database request. So if suppose let's say this is your database, this is my database. So what is happening over here is once the server receives your request, run it will run a query. It will run a query to your database. It will receive the values from the database. It will complete the result and format that as a JSON object or an XML object. And what it does is it's now sends this to the callback function. Tells that I am ready. How does it know it's ready? It does by setting two variables, two of these variables. Which one of them, one of the properties is ready state. There are very different one. It can take values from 1, 2, 3, 4. We are only interested in the value 4. So whenever the ready state is 4, that means I have finished processing your request and the data is ready. Okay. And the other thing that it sets is the status. Status is 200. It can be any HTTP status codes from 200. There is 404. There are many other status codes. There are different numbering systems that are used: hundreds, 200s, 300s, 400s, and 500s, based on the different types of errors that can be initiated. But 200 over here means that the request has completed successfully. That means that the data that is requested is ready, and the request has been completed. So this is what we are interested in. So what we do is whenever the server says that the ready state is 4 and the status is 200, we run the callback function. In the callback function, we need to do something that shows whatever we receive as data in the browser. So this is what is going to happen. So this is step number one, is doing this. This is step number one. The first thing that we want to do is this. Okay, this is the creating the XHR object is my step number one. Step number two is creating my callback function. So if you go back to the slides, you can see that what I'm doing is I'm creating an event listener. Whenever something starts with an on, you remember it is an event listener. So I'm listening to the event which says that if the ready state changes, then call this event. And the function is the handler, that whatever is going to happen once this state changes, I'm going to write it inside over here. Okay. Uh, the one, as I mentioned earlier, the one we are interested in right now is when the ready state is 4 and then the stated is 200. These are the properties. If you remember this slide that I showed you in the previous session, that the XHR object has some attributes that can be set in the session of the ready state, response text, status, and status text. So we are interested in over here by the ready state function, ready state property, and the status property. Okay, and then once the ready state is 4, that means the output is ready, and status is 200, that means it was completed successfully. Then we initiate something. Whatever we receive as a response text, we need to get the data from it and show it on the screen on the browser. Okay, this is what we are interested in. Uh, once we define the callback function, after the callback function, we open the request. That means we initiate actually sending the request. But we have to first specify who are we sending the request to, the name of the server. What is the method we are sending the request to? By, there are different types of methods used, gets and post. Over here, let's focus only on the get method. We'll learn more about the post method when we go to the backend programming in PHP. So let's say the open method over here has 3 parameters. The first parameter is the method by which you are going to make the request call. Over here, in this case, it is the get method. The next one is the destination of the request, the link of the server, the API, the endpoint. We usually refer to this as the endpoint in a server, which is the one that is listening to your request based on whatever you need. Okay, and then true over here means that you are making an asynchronous request. That is, do not stop the server processing, do not stop the processing at the browser, and make a request to the server. And while the request is being handled, you can do whatever you like. It's non-blocking. So that means that you are not blocked anymore. Okay. So this is true. If it's set to false, that means you are making a synchronous request. So it will stop everything until it comes back with the request. For example, if you're doing a login, for a login function, you probably want to make it synchronous, because although you are making a call while you are still on the same page, but you still cannot do anything until the request comes back saying that, okay, you are successfully logged in, or you entered the incorrect username and password. So once you do this, once you create the request, the next part is to send it, to actually execute the whole operation. So here, whenever you want to execute the operation, you just call the send function. If you again remember here, you can see the methods available to us is open and send. Abort is also there, but we are interested only currently in open and send. Okay, so these are the 5 steps. So let's go to the visual part. The first part, we are creating the XHR object. The second part is creating the callback function, which means what to do when we receive a response from the server. The third part is actually creating the request, which is the third part. And the fourth part is actually sending the request to the server, which is the send command. Okay, so this is step by step what we are doing. Okay, we have 5 steps over there. That means that the third one was actually defining the callback function. Okay, and then this will become fourth, which is creating the request, and this will become 5 in that sense. Okay, So let's, do it as we have mentioned in over here. So the third one would be, for example, the third one would be over here, which is the defining the callback function. And then we can go and say fourth one will be creating the request, and fifth one would be to actually send the request to the server. Okay, so these are our steps. And these are the steps that we have to remember. Whenever you want to make an AJAX request, these 5 steps has to be executed, has to be entered, has to be executed in order. Okay, so let's take an example because we understand how it does. This is the complete code. We create the XML XHR object. We create the callback function. I define the conditions in which we need to accept or execute the event handler, and then we do something with the text. We can display it in a specific location. We will see an example for it, and then we open the request, which is defining which method to use, which location, destination, and which type, like asynchronous or synchronous. And then finally, in this fifth step, we want to actually execute the whole process. Okay, so before we go to all of these things, let's take an example. So what I'm going to do is a step-by-step example of what we did. So I'm going to take an example over here. Let's create a new file. I'm going to save this file as let's say api.html. Okay, and let's call it AJAX. And what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to create some bare bones style for my document to see how it looks like. And let's say, for example, over here, I'm going to create a wrapper to wrap my text inside. So, and I'm going to create some styles for, let's say, the body background color of the body, let's say, for example, antique white. I'm going to keep the background as this. I'm going to create some classes for my wrapper, some properties for my wrapper, which would be, let's say, width, say 900 pixels. I'm going to make it in the center, so I'm going to make it margin 0. Let's not make it 0, let's make it 100 pixels, and auto to be centered. And I want to make the text also in the center, so I'll make it text align as center. Okay, and what I want to do is I will have, like, so for example, let's say I have 3 things here: a quote. Let's say web-based systems is the best course in CCSIT. Okay, and then this is a code, and the person who set the code would be over here inside the p tag. What I can do over here is I can have, let's say, a span inside it to tell that this is the one that I want to replace with in the next one. So this one, let's say, so for example, it was set by me. And the last one is I have a button here, say get new code. Okay, and what I want to do now, let's see how it looks like in the output. So let's see, we have something like this. We have a screen. We have some code over here which is set by this person, and whenever I press this button, I will get a new code from an API. Okay, that's my plan, to use AJAX to get new codes whenever I press this button without refreshing the page. This is typically what we want to do right now. So I will style it a little bit easier for us to see how it goes. Let's say, for example, I'm going to make the p tag align to the right, and I have the font style, let's say, for example, to make it italics, however you like it, which looks a bit simpler, I think. So it looks like this. Okay? And then the button itself, maybe I want to make it a little bit fancier. So what I will do is I will make it, let's say, the width of the button, I will make it 100%. That's very long. And I will make the background color of the button as, let's say, fire brick. I'll make, what else? I can say, let's keep it as it is. Or we can have some padding so that it looks a bit, wider, 30 pixels. And then I can also make the text inside it because currently I cannot see it. So I'm going to make it white. Okay. So it looks like this. The font size, I can make the font size as a little bigger. So let's say 100 pixels. Let's see if it's, yeah, it's too big now. Let's make it like 30 pixels. Okay, something like this. So if I press this button, you will get a new code. This is my final plan that I want to do. Okay. So what we will do now is we will try to connect an event handler to the button first, and then we create an XHR object. This is the 5 steps that we have to go through. Okay, so let's start our JavaScript, which is the main part of the script that we want to do. Okay, so what do you want to do first? First, as I told you, that we want to listen to the button itself when the button is clicked. So we want to create an event handler. So I'll say var btn, go to document dot query selector, and I'm going to use the button over here. Since I have one button, I'm going to use this, and btn dot on click equal to function. This is my event handler, and then I would just close the default function of a button, which is nothing, but I want to be on the safe side. I will just say prevent default, which will stop the default action of the button itself. Okay, and then what I want to do over here is once this event handler is created, I want to do something. Let's see if it is working or not. So I'm going to just say alert and say hello, save it, go back and click on alert. Oh, we messed up something. Okay, so it's working. What we want to do now is when the button is pressed, we want to create an XHR object. So if you remember, we had certain steps that we have to go through. So the first step, step number 1, is to create an XHR object. Okay, so what do we do? Where XHR equal to document dot, not document, sorry, we're creating a new object. So we say new XML HTTP request, and that's it. So this is how we are going to create a new XML object. Step number 2, which was to create a callback function. So what do we have to do in a callback function is we have to listen to as on ready state change. Okay, and then we do the same thing. We attach a function to this one, and then step number 3 is to listen for completion and success. How do we do that? We just say if XHR dot ready state is equal to 4 and XHR dot status is equal to 200. This is what I told you in the beginning. So this is step number 3, and then we define something. That is, what do we want to do? We want to change the text inside over here and over here. The author name and the text itself will be different. We'll do that later on because we have to first know the API itself. We have to understand what does the API give us. Okay, so we'll do that later on. The third part, the fourth step here is to create the connection. Okay, and how do we do that? We say XHR dot opening the connection. We are going to use the get method. We are going to specify the address of the API. Again, we don't know that yet, so I'm going to open it and we are going to use it asynchronous because I don't want to refresh the page. And then XHR dot send, which is step number 5. So if I go back to this, step number 5, which is my send the request, okay, which will be XHR dot send. Okay, so now I have done whatever is needed. So step number 1 was to create the XML HTTP request. Step number 2 was to define an event handler, which is a callback function. And step number 3 was to define when do we want to do it. So listen for completion and success. Step number 4 is to open a connection. Step number 5 is actually to send the request. Okay, let's call it open the connection instead of creation, which is much better. Okay, now what do I want to replace first? I want to replace the h1 part and the span part, right? So I will have some way to store them because I want to replace them later on. So, okay, so document dot query selector. I'll say h1 here, where, and then I'll say p. I'll not say p, I'll say span, because this is what I want to replace, right? Document dot query selector span. So I want to replace them here. The text inside it will be replaced whenever we want to refresh. But where are we going to get this text from? So for this example, what I did was I'm using an API, which is a sample API created for a project, which was done by a student who was taking a project for Free Code Camp. What does it do is it provides you with many of the endpoints. One API can actually provide you with many endpoints. So let me give you another example over here. Okay, so let's say, for example, over here, or let's keep this as it is, and let's say, for example, we move here, and let's say, for example, we have you again as the browser, and you want to use the Twitter API. Okay, want to use the Twitter API. Twitter has a lot of information available on it, right? It has tweets, it has a lot of things available on it. So what we want to do now is we want to request. So Twitter is the API provider, but the problem is there are many handles, or what do you call them, endpoints through which you can access Twitter. Now, what are these endpoints? These endpoints assume that these are something like functions which are available at the corner of the provider, something like this. Okay, it's like really bad drawing, but you understand the point. So these are the endpoints through which you can make a request. So maybe let's say this endpoint over here means that get latest tweets. Okay, something like that. It's functions. It functions. This one over here would be, let's say, something get number likes. Okay, or this one could be something like get followers list. Okay, something like that. But you got the point. So each API provider or service provider has different endpoints. So this is what you see over here. Here in this particular API, it's providing me with get a random code, search codes, or get code by ID, search authors, or get author by ID. Okay, but for now, I'm going to use the first one, which is the get random code. So this is my endpoint. So whenever I call this endpoint, I get a code. So let me copy this endpoint, and I'm going to open a browser, and I'm going to put this, and you can see that this is the output that I receive. I refresh it, it will come another one. So this is the API. Each time you request the endpoint, it gives you a random quotation. Okay, this is the main definition of the endpoint that is provided. It tells me that using this endpoint, it returns a single random code from the database. So now we know that this is my endpoint that so now what I can do is I copied the endpoint. So I'm going to go back to my page, and I'm going to paste my endpoint here in the opening request. This is the place where I actually tell them to connect to this endpoint and get me some data. Currently, I'm not providing any parameters because I want a random input. But in the exercise that you are going to do, you are going to send a parameter. Okay, and I'm going to explain that when I explain the exercise. So I think you understood the point. So you have the endpoint. Now, once the endpoint is there, the next thing that you need to do over here is to see what is the structure of this output that we are receiving. Because based on that structure, we need two information. We need the quotation itself, and we need the author of that quotation. So it's currently I cannot see and understand it clearly because it is written in one line. So the best way to do that, if you remember, we can say beautify this JSON file. So I think it's code beautify, that the one that we used in the previous one. And I'm going to copy paste the ID, and I'm going to make it, cleaner. So if you remember this, this is an object. This is a JSON object. In this object, you have key value pairs. So the key is I underscore ID, and this is some random ID assigned to it. It has some tags to tell, what is this? It's a famous code. But we are not interested in that. We are interested in the code itself, which is inside content. Okay, so we want to receive this content. And the other thing that we are interested in is the author. So we are interested in these two things, content and author. So we know that the name of the key is content and the name of the key is author. Now, first of all, we need to know how to get them. So we are inside over here. That means our request is successful and we received this JSON data. Now, JavaScript doesn't understand JSON as it is. It has to be converted into a JavaScript object. So, but the data that is returned, if you look at this picture, the data that is returned is actually in the form of response text. So XHR dot response text is the data. But this data is a JSON file. So I cannot understand, the program doesn't understand JSON. So what it has to do, it has to convert it into a JavaScript object. And how does it do that? There is a way to do that. You use JSON.parse. When you use this function, it will convert the response into a JavaScript object. And then you can store that into a JavaScript variable. Okay. So now whenever I say response.content, I will get the quotation itself. If I say response.author, I will get the author, if you remember the JSON lecture. So what I want to do is I want to replace H1 with the content, and I want to replace the span with the author. How do we do that? Let's say H1 dot text content equal to response dot content, and span dot text content equal to response dot this time we store that inside author. Okay, and that's it. I think we are done. We got the response, we converted the response into a JavaScript object, and then we were looking for the content and the author. How do we know this? We looked at the structure of my output. Even sometimes, whenever you look at the API, they provide you with the response here. So you don't need to actually convert it or look at a sample. You can actually get it from here. See, author will give me the author name and content will give me the content. And you can get this data over here. It's written over here. What does author mean? What does content mean? And these kind of things. Okay, so we have this information over here. Otherwise, if you don't know this, you can actually copy paste it in the browser, and you can see the JSON file. You can copy the JSON file into a viewer, and you can get a clean version, and you can decide how it looks like. Okay, so now we have this output. We have the things that we need right now. Let's see if it's working or not. So I'm going to refresh this page and say get new code. So it's got this new code from the server. So bad things are not the worst things that can happen to us. Nothing is the worst thing that can happen to us, by Richard Bach. If we press this again, it gets a new code. The most important point is to accept or something. Okay, so this is how it is working right now. See, the page is not refreshing. You can see that the page is api.html. It still remains the same. The page is not refreshing. The page is not going to somewhere else. The page is still the same. So whenever I press this button, an event handler is initiated, an XHR object is created, and a request is made to an endpoint, which is called random quotations. And I get the random quotation in a JSON file. I convert this JSON into a JavaScript object, and then I extract the things that I need, which is the content and the author. And then I update the DOM tree by using text content, and I update them with the whatever data that I need from that. Okay, and it keeps on working. And don't worry about the brown lines because I'm actually selected over here, so you can go away. Okay, so this is how we want to do it. This is how XHR, which is how JSON or AJAX works. Okay, so now let's go back to our slides and complete the lecture, which is this is what API meant. This is what I was trying to tell you. APIs, every organization provides you with their services through an API. To use the API, sometimes, see, currently the one I showed you an example is a free API. That means it doesn't require you to enter any type of key. But most of the APIs available, they provide you with a key. So the one that I'm going to ask you to do in the practice session, you are going to get the key and you're going to enter the key in the code itself. Okay, and some of them they have different mechanisms of authorization. They call it OAuth, and there are different ways of doing it. Okay, and then we use AJAX to send and receive the request. You can actually create your own web service by writing it in a programming language, Python, PHP, whichever. We are going to see this in the next part of the course. There are some websites where you can find a list of all open APIs. These are some of them listed in the slides. You can try them out as well. Now about the exercise that you are expected to complete for this session. What you need to do is there is an API called newsapi.org. Now, what does it do is it gives you it has some endpoints. Okay, you can go to the website and you can see that you can see a sample of the output. You can see there are different types of endpoints. Okay, you have a sample request and sample output, which is shown on the website. Now, the first thing, this API is not free. Free in the sense means it's free, but you need to sign up for a key because they don't want the people to just make thousands of requests. So we want to sign up for a key. So when you open this website, you can see there is a button which says get API key. When you press this, you have to fill up a form and they will send you the secret key on your email address. Okay, so then you can use this key in your every request you make to the server. You have to provide this key. Okay, so the request will look something like this. HTTPS. This is the endpoint. Now, in our endpoint, we were just having HTTPS something until headlines. We didn't have a question mark. Question mark means you are passing more parameters. So here I'm saying that the country that I'm looking for is US. The category I'm looking for is business. So I want the top headlines for these two categories and the API key, and you replace this, the capital word API key, with your own API key, whichever you receive on your email address. Okay. So, and then the code to access them will remain the same as we did. For example, you would XHR open and this, and you just replace the API key and you get the response and you get whatever response you get, you can get it from here. Now, remember, if you are getting top headlines, you might receive them as an array because you are not receiving one item. The example I showed you, we were receiving only one item. But here you may receive more than one item. So you have to understand that whatever you receive is an array of objects. It is not just a single value. It is an array of objects. So you need to know how to do that. So that's why you need to understand the structure of the JSON file before you attempt to solve this exercise. Okay, so the exercise is given to you. If you go to the course page, you can see that this is the exercise. This is the code that is given to you. So you don't have to write the code from scratch. You just have to solve the exercise. Okay, so if you click on this, let's click on this, and I'm going to open this in my in brackets. So this is the one that we have. And here you can see that currently, if you look at this one, you can see that you have an API, you have top technology trends, the XHR code is given to you. So what I want you to do is see the API key over here, it's empty. API key equal to, so you have to copy paste your own key over here. Okay, and then whatever you receive, you want to see whatever we are doing is we are getting the response.json. It's an array of items, so that's why we are using a for loop. And what we are doing is whatever we receive, we are attaching it as a to the OL, which is the unordered, which is the ordered list over here. Okay, so this is given to you. But the practice session is not this. The practice is just to see, download the practice exercise and add the key and see the output, which is very simple because the code is written for you. Now, what I want you to do next is add 4 buttons on the top of the page: business, sport, technology, and entertainment. So here in this example, you are only getting it for the technology, right? Let's suppose I don't want for technology. I want the user to decide which news he wants. Either it is business news or sports news or technology news or entertainment news. So this now is become a challenging part. So based on this, you want to get the top news related to this button, whichever was clicked, and then you want to show the data. So this is the practice part. Okay. The first practice part is simple. You just need to put the API key and see how it works. That's it. But the second part is more important because you are here, what you are looking for is you are looking for the top 10 articles related to whichever button was selected. Okay, so hopefully you can solve the exercise. Best of luck. And if you have any questions, please put them on the forum and then we'll try to answer your questions related to this exercise. Thank you.